Deep within a lush forest, two tiny hamsters named Hammy and Honey spent their days navigating the dense undergrowth. They were driven by a single goal: to build a home that was entirely their own, a private sanctuary tucked away from the rest of the woodland community. Every morning, they gathered tiny seeds, sorted through dry leaves, and harvested soft patches of grass. They believed that as long as they worked hard and kept to themselves, they could build a structure strong enough to withstand whatever the forest threw at them. But just as the final leaves were placed on the roof, the air grew heavy. Thick storm clouds rolled in, cutting off the sunlight. Sudden, violent winds began to batter the walls, followed by a relentless, heavy downpour that soaked through their carefully gathered insulation. The small structure couldn't hold. Within minutes, the walls gave way, and their home was reduced to a scattered pile of debris in the mud. Honey stared at the wreckage with tears in her eyes, convinced that because their work was gone, the dream they had shared was gone with it. When an environment changes this quickly, a system built on isolated effort often finds itself without any defense. At this point, the only choices are to give up or to find a completely different way to build. Hammy refused to let the moment of loss define them. He reached out, taking Honey's paw to pull her attention away from the mud. He reminded her that their goal hadn't actually vanished. It would only stay broken if they decided to stop trying. As they stood in the rain, talking about how to start over, their voices carried through the trees, reaching the other animals who had sought shelter nearby. Seeing that the hamsters were already planning their next move, a few neighbors began to emerge from the brush. First rabbits, then squirrels, and finally a flock of birds, all moving toward the wreckage. By simply stating their intent to rebuild despite the crisis, the hamsters had unknowingly invited the rest of the forest to join them. The rebuilding didn't look like the frantic effort of two small hamsters. Instead, each animal looked for ways to contribute a strength the hamsters didn't have. A rabbit dragged in thick structural wood, forming a deeper, more stable foundation. Simultaneously, a squirrel wove sturdy twigs into the upper frame, reinforcing the joints. Meanwhile, birds dropped in soft grass for insulation. Working in parallel, the structure grew with incredible speed. By leaning on the specific skills of their neighbors, the hamsters were able to build something much tougher and more complex than they ever could have finished alone. By sunset, a new house stood in the clearing. It had taken only a fraction of the time to build, but it was clearly built to last. The new design featured a pantry stocked with discs from the squirrels and beds lined with feathers from the birds, luxuries that weren't part of the hamsters' original, modest plan. Honey realized the house was no longer just a shelter from the rain. It had become a living map of the help they had received. In this instance, the total collapse of their first home was actually the necessary step to building a version that was better equipped for the forest's challenges. That night, the animals stayed to celebrate. For the first time, the clearing was filled with the sounds of a community rather than the quiet work of two individuals. The hamsters were no longer living in isolation. They were now a central part of the neighborhood they had once tried to avoid. Hammy looked at the sturdy walls and realized that while their own hands were small, the help of their friends gave them a reach they never had before. Those who had helped that day walked away with a new understanding that no one in the forest had to face a storm by themselves. When a dream breaks, it can feel like the end, but often it's an opportunity for friends and family to step in and help build something even better.